Become a sustaining member of the Commonwealth Club for just $10 a month. Join today.
Hi everyone, I'm Crystal Contreras and I'm the director of Inforum at the Commonwealth Club. Welcome to today's annual Valentine's Day special. This year we're featuring sex writer Tracy Clark Flory and her new memoir, Want Me, a sex writer's journey into the heart of desire. She'll be in conversation with best-selling author Peggy Orenstein. If you'd like to ask either of our speakers a question during this program, you can do so in the chat or comment section of the live stream that you are currently watching. The Commonwealth Club has suspended in-person events for the time being, but we are dedicated to keeping you informed during this pandemic. We're going full speed ahead with the full slate of live online programming in 2021. We ask that you consider donating to the club to help us continue our work this year and beyond. Please visit us at commonwealthclub.org/online to learn more, and you can also text the word donate to 415-329-4231 live during this program. You can find this information and more in the description box below. Now, please join me in welcoming Peggy Orenstein and Tracy Clark Flory to Inforum.
Good evening. Welcome to today's virtual program with Inforum at the Commonwealth Club. I'm Peggy Orenstein, and I'm the author of Boys and Sex, which is out in paperback this week, and also Girls and Sex and Cinderella Ate My Daughter, among other books. And it is a huge pleasure for me to be in conversation today with Tracy Clark Flory. Tracy Clark Flory is a journalist at Jezebel who, like me, has written extensively on how sex has shaped every facet of societal discourse. And we're in conversation today to discuss her wonderful new book, Want Me, A Sex Writer's Journey into the Heart of Desire. If you'd like to ask Tracy a question, please ask it in the chat on YouTube or the comment section of Facebook, and we'll try to get through as many as we can toward the end of the program. Now, let's get started. I'm so excited to talk with you, Tracy.
Me too.
Congratulations on the book coming out.
Thank you so
Today,
much.
right?
Today. And this is a perfect way to celebrate. Yeah.
Aw, really nice. Well, let's just dive in. So in Want Me, you really look at something that is an issue really dear to my heart, which is the ways that girls and women can prioritize desirability or being desirable over their own desire. And that's something that you have dealt with personally. And the book's very title, Want Me, is obviously a reference to that. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about, that whole wish to be wanted while simultaneously not ever asking yourself what you want and where that comes from.
Yeah. Well, the art critic John Berger famously said, men look at women and women watch themselves being looked at. And I think that dynamic really permeates our culture. Women are supposed to be gazed upon and they're not supposed to gaze. And then they're encouraged to work at making themselves desirable, to sort of reduce their wanting to being wanted. And it's a sort of acceptable rerouting of desire through men, through straight men, through being seen, through being wanted. And that sort of rerouting, I think, is only helped by the fact that girls, as you've written about, learn very early on that their sexuality is a liability. And I really love what, Deborah Tolman has written about the dilemma of desire, that adolescent girls very early on come up against their sort of embodied sense of pleasure and desire, and how their sexuality is, how there are all these material and social dangers that are associated with their sexuality. And so it's no surprise then that girls and women often end up feeling sort of disconnected from their own bodies, from their own pleasure, from their own desires, not even sort of knowing what those desires are beyond wanting to be wanted. And so my experience as an adolescent and teenager, as I was, especially online, beginning to sexually explore, was I sort of framed it as I was trying to understand and investigate what boys and men wanted, what they wanted from me. And so I was able to kind of distance myself from my own sexual curiosity, my own sort of hungers. And so I think there's a way in which the sort of, wanting to be wanted functions as a cover story. And I think it's, just one of many cover stories that girls and women are basically made to come up with in order to feel safe in being sexual.
Interesting. I always think about, I mean, I love Deb Tolman's work too. And also it's just such an old dilemma. Simone de Beauvoir talks about the moment when a girl becomes other to herself, which I think is very much like that. And so I think about, her doing that in the 40s, and I think about you coming of age in the 1990s, and you're really the cutting edge. I mean, I think, Tracy, you're the oldest millennial. You're the
Thanks for reminding me.
The ancient millennial that you are.
It's true. Yeah.
That you came of age in the 1990s, and so you really were on the cutting edge of a new kind of set of pressures, a new kind of set of ideas around what this all meant in terms of girls creating a personality or creating a persona to be wanted. And I wonder what specifically made that period such a confusing time for young women.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it was this bizarre juxtaposition of, like, on the one hand, you have Girls Gone Wild infomercials late at night. And then on the other, you have narratives around girl power and breaking the glass ceiling. Like, I feel like I grew up around these messages around, you can be anything you want to be in the bedroom or the boardroom. And I emerged from that kind of believing that, sexual empowerment meant being wanted by men and being like men. That sexual empowerment was something that you sort of got through proximity to men's power. And, I think that the last 2 decades of feminist academic research has really helped me to kind of make sense of it, where researchers have really talked about how the traditional double standard of, he's a stud and she's a slut have sort of loosened, which seems good in some ways, right? Like, the sort of realm of acceptable sexual behavior has broadened within, monogamous, heterosexual constraints, but it's broadened nonetheless. And at the same time, it's the range of acceptable sexual behaviors and also the range of sexual behaviors that are sort of mandated and expected. And so there, have been introduced all these new pressures. And so you have, like, the old, virgin slut dichotomy has sort of become this ambiguous continuum where, you could also be considered a prude, which is just, good luck navigating that. And so, also there arose in the 90s these neoliberal feminist ideas around sexual empowerment that really sort of shifted the narrative from sexual empowerment is something that is about social justice and collective action and collective gain to something that's really about personal advancement, personal improvement, sort of self-help. So I think that this sort of neoliberal narrative of sexual empowerment, which the researcher Lena Bei Chung has written a lot about, that's really helped me to kind of make sense of the driving narrative for me coming of age, both in the 90s and definitely beyond, where I didn't want to kind of face the fact that the sexual playing field was uneven. I wanted to believe that I could sort of set out, and if I made the right decisions, if I seemed in control of my actions, that, I could, that sexual empowerment would be mine. And then obviously I found that was, not so much the case. And I think that illusion of empowerment, of control, has really sort of become even like it's become a defense against the traditional sort of judgments around women's sexual behavior. And so young women have really been pushed into this, unfortunate situation of basically, having to sort of sell their experiences as being more positive and more empowering than they are.
Right. Oh, there's so much to unpack there. I mean, that just rings so true. And that idea of self-objectification being sold as the ultimate empowerment for young women too. That and yeah. And that, I remember a girl once saying to me, when you were talking about that continuum of virgin and slut, that and prude, and she said, usually the opposite of a negative is a positive, but when you're talking about girls and sexual behavior, it's like two negatives.
Right.
And so how do you find a place to stand in that?
Right. What a setup.
Yeah. Right. And,
yeah.
And right into then, in your early 20s, you were a big defender of hookup culture.
Yeah.
And maybe you need to define what hookup culture is, but you eventually really kind of had to grapple with its disappointments. And I wonder if you can talk about that whole process and kind of how you think about it now.
Yeah. Yeah. So in my early 20s, I think I was 23, and this was like, I want to say mid 2000s. And it was a time of, I felt at the time there was a lot of hand wringing about young women's behavior. And I felt like a lot of commentators were, it felt to me that they were basically asking women to sort of police men's behavior and to not take seriously their own desire for adventure and exploration. And so I found myself really pushing back against those narratives. And so I came out with a piece, a personal essay that was titled In Defense of Casual Sex. And, I think the main, feeling behind that piece was like, I can go out and have sex and it's okay. And I'm okay. And I'm having a good time doing it. And there was plenty of that was true at the time, right? Like there was plenty about my experiences with casual sex, which were enjoyable, which were thrilling, and that's valid. That's a valid part of sex and sexual exploration. But as the years went on, I had to face up to the fact that, there was more that I wanted from my sexual encounters, that I was not experiencing authentic pleasure, that I was faking orgasms 99% of the time, and orgasms are not the only measure of good sex, but, they're an important measure, I think. So, I got to a point where I really just, admitted to myself that I was not getting what I wanted from those encounters. And that this sort of, that sense of, empowerment, the satisfaction that I got from feeling wanted, it started to feel too narrow. It started to feel like that was just not enough, that I wanted more than all of that. And then I also came to face what I didn't want to face, which was the unequal playing field, right? And that was like part of it, I think, was coming to terms with that and sort of grieving the reality of that, I wanted to believe, that, that liberation was mine, that, sexual empowerment was mine, that I could just go out and get it. And, it's hard to sort of really face like, the busting of that illusion. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I want to go back for a minute to the orgasm faking situation. because that was one of the things when I was writing Girls and Sex that just like stopped me cold. And first of all, the language had shifted. I could always tell when somebody in an audience was around my age, because they would come up to me afterwards and they would go, whatever happened to I'm responsible for my own orgasm? And they would always do that fist pump thing, because we grew up in the wake of we were the children of our bodies ourselves generation. And somewhere along the line, it shifted from women having orgasms to being given orgasms. And that bugged the crap out of me.
Yeah.
But then I would talk to these girls and I'd say, do you masturbate? And they would go, oh, no, I have a boyfriend to do that. And I'd be like, well, that's the same guy who's rummaging around inside of you like he's looking for a set of car keys. So I don't think that's really,
that's not working. Yeah.
Working so well for you. And then when I looked into the research, there was a long-term study of college students, a longitudinal study that showed that the percentage of young women who were faking orgasm had been steadily rising since 1990 and was now at 70% today. And I don't know. I mean, I'm just, curious about what that experience was like for you, where that came from, and then what it was like to acknowledge as a sex writer that you had been, faking all this time.
An imposter.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Not an imposter. But that it was a different priority.
Yeah, no, I mean, I felt like an imposter because, there was a moment I write about in the book, which is, Dan Savage asked me to give advice to a woman who wrote in because she wasn't having orgasms. And, he asked me to give her advice. And so I gave her advice, but from one orgasm faker to another, so there were definitely these moments where as a sex writer, I did feel like an imposter. But I think that the sort of shift around expectations around women's orgasm is really interesting because in the 60s and 70s, feminists necessarily, fought to sort of reclaim women's orgasm and to emphasize the importance of clitoral pleasure and, all of those things that were absolutely necessary. And then, of course, as so often happens, that sort of battle was, twisted and into a new expectation, a new demand where, orgasm came to stand in for a symbol of sexual liberation, and it became just another thing that you had to sort of perform. And so, the research shows that it's very common that half of women have faked orgasms. Other studies put it even higher. I think that seems pretty conservative even at that. And that they do it for all sorts of reasons. They do it because they want to expedite bad or painful sex, sex that they just want to get over with already. They do it to feel desirable. They do it to give pleasure to their partners. And there is a real, what they call an orgasm gap between men and women in heterosexual pairings, and lesbian women are much more likely to have orgasms during sex. And so there is something about heterosexual sex and the scripts, the normative scripts that come along with that.
What could that be?
What could that be? Maybe the overemphasis on, PIV penetration for one,
Yep. But also, we the whole book is about this, but in that needing to be wanted thing, our own body parts are never named. We rarely say clitoris. We don't learn about our orgasms. We don't learn about masturbation. And then you couple that with that pressure to perform. And there's one thing I've been thinking a lot about lately is how there's always like a correct kind of female orgasm, like it's the vaginal orgasm, it's the multiple orgasm, it's the G-spot orgasm, it's the squirting, you always have to have the right sort. And I don't think men have a right and wrong sort of orgasm. I think they just come.
Right. I hope this is not too risque for this program, but I was just writing about, I've written about squirting before, but I was also just writing about, deep throating and actually the theory around that of that part of why that arose is that it makes women's pleasure legible in that it I don't want to get too graphic, but that there are all these, there's a sense of like sort of like the mystery of a woman's body and of a woman's pleasure, the sense that her pleasure can be faked. And I think squirting is one of these examples of a way that to sort of like really vividly kind of portray pleasure, and to mimic a man's pleasure, also to sort of put it in a man's sort of terms, and to make it legible. I like this idea of like that women's pleasure has to be sort of morphed in some way in order to even be comprehensible.
That it has to be visible and measurable, or it's very threatening. It's very threatening.
Yes.
I have some Norman Mailer quote there, but I can't remember it all of a sudden. About his how threatened he was by the clitoral orgasm. It was crazy. Anyway, that said, speaking of Norman Mailer, you were again a kind of at a kind of cutting edge as a very old millennial of adolescents who grew up with kind of video porn at your fingertips, and I wonder what you think the impact is or was of coming of age online in that way for young women, and especially with internet porn. And if you want to, you can throw your dad under the bus here a little bit. But
oh, sure, he's watching right now.
I bless his heart for being willing to be who he is and support you. That's I love your dad.
Me too. It's very lucky. He's very supportive. I mean, the impact of porn is complicated, right? Like, I think that as a young person, I definitely approached porn as a guidebook. I understood that people were watching it for entertainment, but I took that like this was an ultimate representation of especially what men want. This is literally what men want from me. And did not have much of a complex or sophisticated understanding, of course, as a teenager, of fantasy and how fantasy works. And so I did turn to it as, instructional and aspirational. And that gave me a lot of, vivid sort of source material to work with. And I definitely used that source material and I applied it in my sex life. And I think that, that did not help me get any closer to experiencing authentic pleasure during sex. On the other hand, I think that porn was a really vital part of my, early, especially in my 20s, like my sexual exploration and my sort of, getting to understand my own desires, my own body, my own mind. It was this sort of, I took the back door in that I was in pursuit of understanding men's desire and sort of mastering men's desire. But in the process, sort of, through that cover story, I was able to kind of start exploring on my own. And I think, to me, that was a really meaningful part of my, journey of self-discovery. Like, it was, I feel like I almost had to kind of trick myself into it, like that and actually that's really common. I've learned that researchers have found that girls often talk about watching porn as research.
Oh yeah.
Which yes, you must have come across that a lot. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That it's not for pleasure, that it's to sort of understand how to be desirable.
Mm-hmm. I also just saw there was a nationally representative survey out a few weeks ago by some of my favorite researchers that found that among 18 to 24-year-olds, the most often source cited for helpful information on how to have sex with a partner was internet pornography. And that came out ahead of talking to your partner.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, because that requires vulnerability, right? And that sort of requires like asking questions and Oh.
I know. The good news was that among the younger kids, the 14 to 17-year-olds, they cited their parents as the most helpful source of information on sex. So it was like a tremendous
Good.
opportunity for
Yeah.
parents at that point, but to be aware that, you got to address this. We can't not address it. I mean, I think
You have
one
to
of the
actually talk
things,
about it.
yeah, I
Yeah.
think that one of the things that's really clear in your writing is that you have to be talking about this with your young person now.
Yeah. Well, yeah, to throw my dad under the bus. Sorry, Dad. Yeah, I mean, I think like I write in the book about finding my, outspokenly feminist father's porn. And, to me, that I didn't know how to make sense of that as a teenager. Like to me, this was like, oh, this is in total contradiction with everything he's ever told me about what he values and wants from women. And, I don't think we'd ever talked about porn in my household other than I remember my mom like vaguely warning that like I might find scary videos on the internet. And, things that I didn't really want to see. But there was no conversation about fantasy. I mean, I think like to me, there's a real cultural sort of illiteracy, for lack of a better word, around fantasy, that we don't talk about how fantasy works. We don't talk about what it can mean for people. And so, I certainly just did not, I was not prepared to sort of process it, make sense of it, to make sense of, the videos that I was seeing, and to do anything other than sort of interpret them very literally as like, this is sexy sex.
Well, and I think also, I mean, to be fair to Tracy's dad, I don't think at that point that that things had tipped so that you I mean, I think now if you don't talk about internet pornography with your child, you are actually setting them up for some real, unfortunate consequences potentially, and it's just too big. You just can't not address it anymore. And I don't think that had happened. I think
it was all new.
It was
also new. I mean, this was like back in like, I mean, I think it was like 97 or 98 when like, was it Time or Newsweek had, like I remember the cover with the kid that was like, lit in this ghostly way, who was at the computer, and it was, all about like predators online. Like it was this like very intense time of like the internet is new, and we definitely didn't have like a sophisticated way of talking about it yet.
And hopefully we're developing that.
We can help.
Yeah. I mean, you took it a little further than most. You became a sex writer. And also, at the same time, and not that this is in any way a contradiction, but also feminism, even as these other forces were at play, feminism was a major early influence on you in your own home, growing up in Berkeley, in the culture. So how did that influence your sexual coming of age?
I mean, it was huge. Like, I think when I think about the book, feminism is like one of the big characters that sort of looms large, right? Like there's feminism, there's porn. And, feminism was my sort of introduction to, critiques around body ideals and that sort of thing. And, at the same time, I don't know, it was interesting. Like early on, it was very much about the sort of critique. And then I think at a certain point, there became this sort of tension where feminism, I felt like I had to sort of reconcile my feminist beliefs and sort of feminist analysis with my experience of sex and sexuality, and start asking questions like, can I reconcile the fact that I watch porn and I'm a feminist, or that I'm a feminist and I have these desires that seem on the surface to be in contradiction with my actual beliefs? And, it was really like stumbling upon thinkers like Carol S. Vance, and a lot of the thinkers that came out of the Barnard Conference on Sexuality in 1982, I believe.
I was there.
Wait, you were there?
Yeah.
Oh my God. Okay. No big deal.
As a kid. Yeah.
I didn't know that. Oh my God. That's really cool.
Isn't
okay.
that
I'll have to ask you about that later. That's really cool.
Claim to
Or we
fame.
could talk about it now.
Yeah,
That's
all right.
awesome.
Yeah. I know.
I mean,
Wow.
yeah, a lot of the thinking that arose from that conference, honestly, like once, and I stumbled upon it far too late. I think, this often happens, the sort of reinventing the wheel, where I was sort of processing these ideas and dilemmas. And, it was really only years into that I stumbled across all these other thinkers who had come long before me and who had, of course, already sort of processed a lot of it. But a lot of those thinkers sort of, that felt like really overdue validation and sort of permission, because the way that they talked about, they really talked through these difficult ideas of like, as a woman desiring in a patriarchal culture, like, are our desires necessarily a result of patriarchy? And, if so, like, do we get to desire? Do we have to wait until, the revolution is complete? Like, should we re-educate ourselves, our desires, our sexuality? And so, that was a major influence. Those thinkers were a major influence. But I spent a lot of time sort of swinging between various ideas within feminism around, sex and pornography, because there is a diversity of ideas within feminism, counter to popular belief often. Yeah. And so it was like, there was a trying on of ideas, and I eventually sort of came to, landed where I felt comfortable. But feminism has been always really deeply tied to my sexuality, just in that it's been, a lens of analysis, pretty much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, our bodies are ourselves. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's still really true. And that idea of, well, first of all, I just want to say, I mean, I think it's really important to you're not reinventing the wheel. You're taking ideas that had been discussed in one context and moving them forward. I think of it more to stay with that kind of metaphor, kind of guyish metaphor. You're moving the ball down the field a little bit in a new era. But also, I mean, I think that issue of like, what would authentic female sexuality be is really thorny. And I wonder if you struggle throughout the book with that idea of an authentic sexual identity. And what is it?
Right. It's a really good question.
Tracy?
What is it? Tell me. Yeah. I mean, there are sociological theories around, the performance of the self that would probably argue that there is no authentic self, that, that we basically are ourselves kind of being through these, sort of social performances that are, moderated by cultural norms. And, Judith Butler has written a lot about this. So I think my feeling is that, there's no pre-cultural self when it comes to sexuality, that we're all products of cultural influence. That being said, I think that it's possible to sort of, examine oneself and one's experience of, sexuality and desire. And, for me, I think the most essential question is sort of like, it's, does this feel good? Do I feel it? Period. Do I feel it in my body? Like these very, like, just fundamental, most basic, the sense of embodiment. That, I spent so much time really sort of analyzing and critiquing and, are my desires feminist enough or not? And, can I re-educate myself? And where I ultimately arrived was this feeling of, yes, does it feel good? Does it feel good? And for me, that's, everyone's going to have a different answer, but for me, that's a pretty important place. That's a pretty important measure of authenticity is, is it pleasurable? Does it feel good? Can I feel it in my body? Am I in my body? Period.
So you feel like you did find that for yourself?
Yes. Yeah. I did. And I think, the feminist influence honestly was, as much as feminism was this sort of, influence of, where I was critiquing and analyzing, I think it also in the end was this force of sort of acceptance, because there have been so many feminist writers who have really leaned on that, the importance of Susie Bright, of pleasure, desire, of now I want to summon her quote, which is she said, I think it's, I don't sit in my bed with my dildo trying to rationalize anything.
Susie Bright would be in my pantheon of feminist saints if I could have one.
Absolutely. She's
fantastic.
That's someone to aspire to. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
I want to move from women to men for a second, because as the book goes on, as you said already tonight, you sort of were on this quest to master straight men's desires without necessarily knowing your own. But even where that's concerned, it seemed like you found out that in some ways you had misunderstood those desires.
Yeah.
And can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, setting out as a sex writer, especially, but also in my personal life, like, I think I was anticipating a cliche of straight men's desire. I was anticipating, superficiality, unemotionality, and writing about sex, interviewing men about their sex lives, time and again, I basically, came up against the opposite of what I expected, which was, tenderness, vulnerability, anxiety, and God, like tenderness, vulnerability, anxiety, those were not the things that I expected to find. And so, especially like writing a sex advice column for a period there, like I really had all of these really amazing moments where people were trusting me with their most personal, private experiences and stories. And that was illuminating in general, not just around men, but I think the process of that really, helped me to adopt a more nuanced perspective on quote unquote male desire, and to realize that there is no male desire, no straight male desire, that there are desires plural. And I think also, my sort of misinterpretation of porn was another key piece of that, where, interpreting porn as a literal representation of what men want, not understanding the very funny ways that fantasy can work, that fantasies are not something, whether they're in porn or whether they're something that's imagined, they're not always something that you can just literally interpret in a straightforward way, that they can have the sort of opposite meaning of what they would seem to have. And that, for example, fantasies of dominance can arise from, feelings of being too much, feelings of anxiety, that sort of thing, these like softer emotions that I hadn't really anticipated. And so, also in the end, like, I spent all this time kind of trying to prepare for this sort of cliche of straight male desire. And then I end up with marrying a man who is very much not that cliche, right? Like, and I'd spent all this time really kind of studying a realm that ended up to not be very relevant at all in a lot of ways. And so there have just been all of these surprises along the way, and I think that's been the real irony is really preparing myself for like something that didn't exist. Kind of chasing after this illusion of straight male desire that's presented in our culture, that's sold to men and it's sold to women too.
Yeah. And okay, so you have a sort of I think something that I had to also deal with in a book, which is I wrote a book that was a memoir about infertility, and then in the end, the kind of deus ex machina comes down, and I get pregnant spontaneously and have a baby. And it was a little uncomfortable because I didn't want that to be the kind of moral of the story,
Yes.
the happily ever after.
Yeah.
And you're going along being the sex writer, having casual sex, doing all these kinds of things. But then the thing that really kind of becomes the beautiful thing that you find is marriage and motherhood. And part of me was like, yay, Tracy. I mean, I know you, and I know that is true. And part of me was like, uh-oh.
Yeah, right. Like that can't be the end. So, like, that's not this isn't a Prince Charming situation, right? Like a feminist Prince Charming.
So how did you deal with that in life, in the book? Talk about that a little bit.
Right. I mean, in life, I'm totally fine with it. In life, I'm very happy with it. I mean, I think in a lot of ways, I really, talk about wanting to be wanted. Like I tamped down my desires often in this sort of hookup culture realm. I silenced any desire for anything more than what I got. And so, whether that was more pleasure, or whether that was more commitment or more, intimacy, I really sort of, I shut that down. So I think there were a lot of ways in which, yes, I was going out there and having casual sex and, uncommitted sex, and how great. And it was in some ways. And yet I also had desires beyond that, and, didn't really allow for those. And so, the sort of shift from that into monogamous marriage was, it wasn't a total about face, really. It was more of a coming to terms with some of what I wanted, and also coming to feel more comfortable with being vulnerable. I think that I just, for a long time, sex especially felt very adversarial, and it felt like, I really had to sort of have my armor on. And I then got to a point where I actually felt like I really, not only could I put up with some vulnerability, that I actually wanted it. And so, so that has felt good in my personal life. As for the context of a memoir, where that's like the end of the story arc, I hate it. I mean, I hate it in that, like, I hate that I don't want to reproduce the happy ending. And so I try to kind of moderate that in the end of the book by basically talking about, I'm not sexually empowered. I'm not like, this is my happy ending. This is the end. That really, this is about, I mean, for one, in terms of empowerment, I don't think you could say that you're empowered, that you're sexually empowered, if you feel like you've sort of found shelter from the storm. And that's kind of how I feel. Like, I feel like my 20s were the storm, and I've found a partner that I'm comfortable with, that I feel safe with, and that I can communicate with, and who's a feminist, which, it's challenging. It's challenging to find that. But so I don't feel like that sense of sort of safety, or having like, kind of dodged a bullet, like that doesn't feel like empowerment to me. It isn't empowerment. And I think that, I try to write in the book about how, sexual empowerment cannot be achieved individually, that the limit, of course we individually can sort of strive to have greater pleasure and, greater connection with our bodies and all of that. But, necessarily that is going to be a limited journey when it's done individually, when it's, again, that neoliberal idea of like shifting it away from the collective movement, and really, emphasizing sort of self-help and self-improvement. And so, yeah, I really, I also think that what's important for me, what I've tried to do with the book, is to emphasize that, like, the most important journey is not to be corny, but it's my relationship with myself, that it's not about my current relationship, that it's about what I've found in terms of my relationship to myself and knowing myself. And, also that it isn't about arriving at a final destination. that it's really about a journey, that one thing I've definitely found is that sex sort of changes over the course of a lifetime. And so it's not about sort of achieving a final sort of sexual self, that it's really about kind of being present for that journey over the course of a lifetime. And who knows what that looks like.
I love that. Here's something I want to know what it looks like. I want to know what it looks like to be, or what it feels like, or what it is like to be writing publicly about sex as a woman on the internet.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah. Well, one, I have learned by now to not read the comments. So that's good. I figured that out.
I used to have a bracelet that said that.
Oh, that's great.
Don't read the comments. Yeah.
Don't read the comments. Yeah. Just don't read the comments. It's taken me over a decade to learn that, but I've learned it. So that helps. But, at the beginning of my career, I was writing for Salon's feminist blog at the time. And, the misogynistic trolls that haunted the comments threads on my articles were, just impressively angry. And the way I sort of dealt with it at the time was I would print out the very worst comments, just saying, the unimaginable things, previously unimaginable things. And I would post them on my fridge at home because I was sort of willing myself to find them funny. And I remember my mom at the time being very concerned because she didn't think they were funny. And she found them pretty threatening. And, I think years later, I started to take them more seriously because I started to sort of observe acts of public violence that were associated with anger and resentment around women's sexual behavior. And, also started to observe the ways that the manosphere, as it's called, which is really just loosely connected sites on the internet that are, united in their anti-feminism, everything from PUAs to pickup artists to involuntary celibates, incels, that sort of thing, that I became the subject of some of those, blog posts in that realm where they were sort of debating my sex life, turning to personal essays of mine and sort of using me as a case study. The anger there was very clear. And it started to seem less amusing at that point. So, I would say that aside from not reading the comments, a positive development has been that there's just more awareness about harassment of women online, right? Yeah. Like, Gamergate happened. This is part of the, mainstream cultural conversation. And so while it is a problem and not enough is done about it, it's at least something that we sort of know how to talk about now.
Yeah. Okay. I want to ask you one last question before I take questions from the viewers, and that is, you have a son, you have a little boy, and I'm just wondering, as you think about him growing up, him coming of age in this culture, and how you think about raising him in terms of sexuality, authenticity, really, if he is somebody who is interested in women, what that would, how do you raise that boy? How are you going to raise your son? I feel like there's no more feminist act than raising a great son.
I'm so excited for it. I really am. I'm definitely going to be the mom who cannot wait to have the sex conversation, not the sex conversation, but the first of many ongoing conversations around sex. And about porn, all of those things. I think, honestly, we're already sort of, talking to him about it in terms of just like in an age appropriate way around, consent with, as experts say, around tickling and that sort of thing. Like if he says stop, I stop. And I said, oh, you said to stop. I'm not going to tickle you if you said to stop, So things that are totally age appropriate. People freak out when you talk about like, sex education for toddlers, but like really like you're talking on that level of just like understanding like bodily autonomy on that level of play even, right? So I mean, I think around porn, especially, like I want to talk to him about it. I want to, I think one thing that's really important is to normalize kids' curiosity and the fact that they will pursue sexual information online, that they will, want to sexually explore online, and to really come from a place of normalizing that and valuing it, and sort of being able to talk about it from that starting point. And also to be able to, share without too much information, that his dad and I have also gone through the same things, that, we were, at least I was, not so much his dad, but that I was a teenager on the internet too. And to establish some common ground around that. But mostly, I think one of the most important things is that it's not the sex talk. It's just ongoing conversations around sex that happen, naturally and casually, because sex is a part of life.
There you go. That is absolutely, that's it. That is the best thing. Okay, let's take a couple questions from the audience here. Somebody is asking, I don't know if you've reported on this at all, what you think the effects of COVID will be on sex behavior, and whether that's sex with masks on.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I had looked into doing a story on this a couple months ago. And I was asking around to some sex therapists and researchers to kind of see what their vibe was on this. What is COVID doing for sexual relations? There were some surprising things, like that people were kind of reporting like surprised delight at, having a distance date and sitting 6 feet apart from each other on a bench and not touching, like that there was this sort of level of excitement in slowing everything down, and a sort of thrill around that, sort of the tension of it. And I remember talking to a single friend of mine who was dating, going on distanced dates through Tinder. And she was really finding herself relieved that at the end of the night, she was finding that her dates were, instead of going in for a kiss and just sort of assuming that was okay, that there was a lot of negotiation around, even like, can we hold hands?
Yeah.
That on just like the most basic level of just really simple communication around consent and comfort, that should be happening.
Teach people.
Yeah.
Talk about consent. Maybe that will be one of the positive consequences.
That's what we can hope, right? Yeah, that there's some upsides at least. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. So somebody's asking about, how they say, those younger millennials, that they're having less sex, that we're in a sex recession. Do you think that's real? And why I guess Gen Z, why do you think Gen Z is having, if so, less sex?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I've definitely seen the sort of trend stories around that. And I don't know how much I believe it. I mean, I think there's such a tendency to sort of have these big generational stories about how, kids these days are having sex in some new and surprising and scary way, where, there might be some real evidence at hand, but, it tends to be drastically overstated, right? Where it's in a sort of fear-mongering way, where, you know, some of the headlines I've seen have definitely been like, kids these days, they're not having sex. And, you know, where it's the sort of opposite of what, you know, I was going through.
Kids these days, they are having sex. They're not having sex.
They're having too much sex. And so, you know, I I guess I kind of I take all of it with a grain of salt, but you know, I think it's possible. I think it's possible that there might be something there.
Well, my understanding is that there's a couple of things. One is that a lot of those stories are asking specifically about penis-vagina intercourse. So they're not asking about oral sex. They're not asking about a lot of other behaviors.
So that's interesting.
Yeah. So, you know, they're not looking at how those behaviors are changing. And the other piece is that if your primary way of interacting is in hookups, you are not going to be having sex as much or as consistently as people who have relationship-based sex. So I think that those are a couple of the reasons. I mean, some people say, and they're watching porn, you know, maybe, but I think these other two things are actually really pretty salient reasons why that's the case.
And that could be a real positive, I suppose, in a certain sense, like, you know, expanding sort of sexual repertoire that, you know, decenters potentially PIV sex could be good.
Potentially, although, I mean, a little inside, but the you know, since the disproportionate situation hookups is heterosexual in heterosexual hookups is women performing oral sex on men.
Oh, great. Okay. Well,
much, but
never mind.
At any rate, that's part of my understanding.
We're not talking about cunnilingus. Okay.
Not so much.
What a surprise.
I mean, we can, but we aren't.
Well, we would, but
we would talk about it. You and I. I also, there's a question, this is as a journalist, how do you identify the stories that you report on? And what over time have you found, what have been some of the most fascinating stories you've done? Some of them are in the book, I think.
Yeah. The book is pretty much a roundup of the most fascinating. In terms of how I identify stories and how I pursue them, honestly, especially lately, I sort of pursue my own obsessions. That's sort of my current marching orders at my job, which are the best kind of marching orders to have, which is just pursue what interests you, pursue what you can't stop thinking about. But that's really been kind of the way that I've been lucky enough to be able to just kind of ask the questions that I want to ask. And, you know, on a certain level, just selfishly pursue my own interests. But I think that's, you know, I think that can be really revealing, you know, that if I'm interested and obsessed with something, you know, most likely there are going to be other people who feel the same way. And so in terms of, gosh, some of my best reporting, there's been such a wild range. You know, I've reported at an orgasmic meditation retreat, which was a wild experience. I have reported on a kinky fox hunt in the woods of Santa Cruz, a sort of adult version of hide and seek. I've reported on sexual healers and many a porn set, which has been very educational. I mean, I would say that like reporting on porn sets has been, for me, some of my favorite reporting, just because obviously, like, coming from my own personal history growing up, watching porn and having my sort of misconceptions about it and my own interpretations of it. And then the reality of stepping foot on a porn set and seeing how much it is a performance, it's a production, it's entertainment, it's an illusion, and being able to really see how that illusion is created, you know, seeing the details of like Cetaphil being used for the money shot. Like, you know, there's something about that that's so powerfully busts the illusion, right? That I grew up, you know, believing in. And, you know, seeing performers now negotiate consent behind the scenes that you don't see on camera, or asking for lube, you know, that's edited out in the end, that sort of thing. So those have been some of the most powerful moments for me reporting.
Somebody asks here, they said we've been talking a lot about porn. True that. And how that's affected the sex lives of young people. This person would like to know, what about the rise of dating apps? And how do you feel like they've affected how people view relationships and sex?
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's something I can't speak to much from personal experience, because I mean, there was OkCupid when I was single and dating, but I was just before Tinder. And so I just completely missed out on that experience, which is its own unique thing. I mean, I do tend to sort of believe, just from, friends' experiences, that, there is a way in which it can sort of feel like there's just, limitless number of people at your fingertips, and that it can sort of make it feel like there's less sort of interest in commitment, or, that, and that there's more competition. And so that aspect of it feels, to me, very real and like a major shift. And then at the same time, I have plenty of friends who've had very positive experiences with it, and who feel like I think they've helped connect people with, like-minded people with similar interests in a way that, only the internet can. And, that can't be discounted, right? Like that there is that positive aspect of it too. It's not all bad. But it is a complicated new reality.
Okay, last question. It's a tradition here at Inforum to ask all our speakers the following, and I'm glad that you have to do this and not me. What is your 60-second idea to change the world? Tracy, go.
All right. Well, I'm gonna steal from the feminist researcher that I mentioned earlier, Lena Bei-Chung, who's writing on neoliberal ideas around sexual empowerment. Is so fantastic. And so my idea is that, as she writes about, that we remember what sexual empowerment used to mean, which is that it's a collective struggle for collective gain, that it's about social justice, that it's not an individual pursuit, that, of self-improvement. And so to remember that definition of empowerment, rather than the commercialized, neoliberal feminist version that is so popular these days.
That's beautiful. Well, thank you to my friend and my neighbor and my colleague, Tracy Clark-Flory, for joining us today at Inforum and the Commonwealth Club. And we'd like to remind our audience that Tracy's new book, Want Me, A Sex Writer's Journey into the Heart of Desire, which you can see behind her there, is available now at your preferred bookseller. And if you'd like to watch more virtual programs or support the Commonwealth Club's efforts to make virtual programming, please visit commonwealthclub.org/online. I'm Peggy Ornstein. Thank you, and stay safe.